Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more lore. The Space Marines. The mighty warriors of the Adeptus Astartes are the truest interpretation of humanity's strength made manifest. Whilst the Sisters of Battle are the faith incarnate, and the Hammer of the Emperor are the true bastion of the Imperium. When one wants to see the glory of humanity made manifest in every single facet, there is no finer example than the Adeptus Astartes. And even amongst their most hallowed of ranks, the original 9 legions now made chapters stand apart from their brethren, having more honors, won more wars, slain more foes, and lost more blood than any other. And that is what we're going to be focusing on today. For whilst many knows the great glories of the Imperium, the noble sacrifices of its Astartes, very few know the harshest realities of war. For every glory, there is an equally terrible defeat. And when it comes to the original 9, they have had the mightiest of victories, and thus, some of the worst defeats. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, strap in and buckle up and let's get cracking on with today's video, as we take a look at the worst defeats of each of the Space Marine legions. We're going to be going in order of things, starting off with the first legion, the Dark Angels. The Unforgiven are a quite mysterious bunch, so trying to find out exactly what they're up to is a little difficult. But luckily for us, we know exactly what their worst defeat was, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was the Siege of the Rock. The first one, not the second one with Ashtor. And some of you may be saying, wait, hold on Brad, how is that not the worst? Like, it took a whole other Demon Prince, Bellicor, to stop it. Well, that's because the damage caused with the Siege of Ashtor was bad, but when you compare to what was lost in the first siege, it weighed much more heavily, especially to the Dark Angels. But time to set the scene. The Noctis Aeterna has happened, aka the Great Rift, and everything is pretty bad. Half the Imperium is scoured in darkness, cut off from the light of the Emperor and the Astronomicon, now preyed upon by hordes of roaming demons, and the Rock was no different. Normally the massive shields of the Rock would prepare it and protect it from any and all foes, but not in this case, for a massive demon army led by the fallen demon prince known as Marbarus swarmed through the Dark Angels and their hallowed fortress monastery. Fighting erupted all over the planet-sized space station, from the docks to the grand halls, and even deep in the labyrinthine sublevels. Nowhere was spared from blood, for the hordes of the demon went rampaging and ransacking, killing indiscriminately, burning and destroying, seemingly for the fun of it. The Dark Angel would marshal what forces they could, which was most of their chapter at the time, and they would lead a counterattack, at the head of which was none other than Grand Master Samael. He would engage Marbarus in personal combat, but even the great might of the first master of the Dark Angels would prove nothing compared to a fallen demon prince, and Marbarus would win the duel, locking Samael in a vicious death grapple, nearly crushing him to death. But it was at that pivotal moment that Grandmaster Belial would intervene, and using his famous blade, he would cut off the hands of the demon prince, forcing him to retreat. However, Belial could not finish the duel, as soon after Marbarus would retreat, seemingly gained nothing except for a lot of Dark Angels dead. But that's only for those who didn't know the truth. Taken from Dark Angels Codex, 8th edition. Even as the Noctis Aeterna passed, the Rock is invaded. A demon army led by the fallen demon prince Marbarus penetrates the formidable shields that surround the asteroid base. Fighting takes place along the docks, within the grand halls, and even the labyrinthine sub-level dungeons that burrow deep in the rock. As the conflict reaches its climactic point, the invaders disappear, with the same suddenness from which they manifested, having ultimately achieved little beyond mindless slaughter and destruction. Or so it is believed. There is one, however, that knows otherwise. In the deepest dungeon, a secret prisoner known only to the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels has been set free. Azrael suspects the entire battle was merely a diversion, so that nefarious agents could accomplish their true task. Yet it is a theory that he must keep to himself, but none could know of Luther's imprisonment. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why this earns #1 spot. Well, this and a couple other reasons. In addition to Luther having escaped or been free, one of the two, the Wardens in White, two of the most venerable and ancient of the Dark Angel's dreadnoughts were slaughtered, having defending the hidden passageways. Though no one got past them, losing those two was quite a blow. Yet what they did get past was into the goodie drawer. For it turns out, a massive amounts of Chaos relics, some having been seized well over 10,000 years ago, were stolen from the chapter's keep. And when you consider how powerful these relics are, and the Dark Angels are known for having forbidden stuff, the loss of these relics were not only a blow to the chapter's honor and pride, but a credible threat to the Imperium. So to sum everything up and tie it in a nice neat little bow, a demon prince and his fallen army just appeared out of nowhere, smacked the Dark Angels a couple, put the Grand Master in the dirt, killed a whole bunch of them, destroyed their house, wrecked shit, killed two of their biggest, oldest, greatest boys, stole their most important prisoner that has been a secret for well over 10,000 years, and yoinked a bunch of relics that very much have the potential to end the world. Quite a poor showing for the Sons of the Lion. And when you combine that with the loss of hundreds of Astartes, yeah, it's pretty easy to see why this was the greatest defeat the chapter ever suffered. But from the Scions of the First to the Riders of the Fifth, let's take a look at the White Scars. Next up for the White Scars, we then have the War for Trigoris, or aka when Lufthuron decided to get on his bullshit and fuck up the White Scars. In the year 999 M41, during the War of Armageddon, the Great Khan Jubal, their chapter master, was commanding a good chunk of their forces in the Armageddon system. Thus, Trigoris was not as defended as it should have been, and it was a prime target for the Red Corsairs, who appeared out of the warp and launched a massive assault on the White Scars' homeworld. It wasn't just them though, as Lufthuron had managed to gather a whole gaggle of other Chaos Space Marine warbands, cultists, and even more nefarious things, but that comes a little later. The White Scars prepared their defenses led by Burutai Khan, yet the Tyrant of Badab was known in Imperial history for a reason. His assault was all-consuming. The planet was soon overwhelmed, and even with the return of Jubal Khan and later White Scars Brotherhood, it wasn't enough. For even as the Great Khan tried his very best to slow down the onslaught, the Great Rift would occur. And lo and behold, Chaos Space Marines and cultists were joined by literal hordes of demons spewing forth from the gaping wound in reality. Within days, hundreds of thousands, nearly the entire population of the world of Trigoris, were slain. So much so that many thought that they would become extinct. And for those who don't know, Trigoris is the only place that the White Scars recruit from, so this is a big problem. It was here that Jubal Khan reached an impasse. So, like his father before him, he decided that he would ride out. He would take his warriors and lead on a desperate strike right into the heart of the enemy, hoping to goad the chaotic dogs to follow him back to their fortress monastery, Khonzo. Thankfully, it worked. The White Scars were fast as all hell, and the Chaos Boys were angry as all hell. Thus, they fell for the rage bait. Thus, the final phase of the battle would enter, the siege of the fortress monastery. And the White Scars gave a good showing, but they were in a hell of a state. It was at this pivotal moment that Khosrow Khan, Master of the Hunt, and his third company would finally arrive. With the majority of the Chaos forces focusing on the siege of the fortress monastery, Khosrow Khan was able to marshal the scattered White Skull forces that remained, in addition with whatever remaining troops he could from the Trigoran population. All in all, he gathered basically the entirety of the loyalist population, both mortal and Astartes alike, and at the head of this great horde, Khosrow Khan would launch a spear thrust deep into the lines of the besieging Chaos forces. At the same time, Jubal Khan would sally out from the fortress monastery, and the Keter forces would be caught in a deadly hammer and anvil. But even then, this would be no easy fight. After 3 days of consistent bloody battle, Khosrow Khan's warriors would finally break through into Khonzo, breaking the siege and relieving the fortress monastery. After this, Huron knew when the time was up. Thus, he and his Red Corsairs would formally leave the planet, as not only had the siege been broken, the Noctis Aeterna had begun to wane, meaning that all the demons that were on the planet just suddenly went poof. Thus, the Tyrant of Badab would depart, but only he would depart. Trigoris was still littered with countless Chaos warbands, cultists, demon engines, whatever minor demons managed to exist, and every goddamn thing in between. While the White Scars were stuck cleaning up the mess of their homeworld, Blackheart and the Red Corsairs would continue in the Yassan sector, the home sector of the White Scars, conquering various worlds, rampaging, pillaging, and basically causing a mess. And as for the aftermath, the White Scars were left truly broken. Taken from Codex White Scars 8th edition. Trigoris lies close to the vast warp rift of the Maelstrom, hanging amidst the woes of the Yassan sector, and has faced predation from renegade warbands and Xenos raiders alike. Since the Great Rift split the galaxy in two, the planet's situation has only become worse. The Maelstrom has grown in size and power, and its malign influence has begun to affect Chogoris itself. The piratical Chaos Space Marine warlord, known as Huron Blackheart, led a vast invasion of the Yasan sector, and actually succeeded in invading Chogoris itself. Though subsequently driven off, his twisted horde scarred the home world of the Warhawk's descendants. The marks of chaos can be seen everywhere, despite the White Scar's efforts to scour away the taint and truly reclaim their world. Ancient grasslands burn with multicolored flame, and many of the beasts of the mountains have turned into monstrous, deformed things. The shells of traitor dropships litter the plains, inhabited by packs of flesh-eating cultists and rogue demon engines. Worse still, the White Scars have not been able to protect the world's population from the baleful curse of the warp. The hardy tribespeople are quick to destroy any of their number who show signs of corruption or mutation, but no threat is more insidious. The tribe's seers continue to administer ritual facial scars to those who are proved to be worthy warriors, and yet more and more often, those scars seem to reflect the shape of the Citradix Maledictum, which splits the skies at night. What this means for the future of the White Scars is unclear, but the Storm Seers scrutinize each of the chapter's new initiates even more closely than they have in the past. The White Scars' efforts to purge the servants of chaos from Chogoris' surface have met with much success, but this is only the first step on a long road. The entire Yasan sector has felt the wrath of the Red Corsairs. While some planets were battered and bloodied, but remained in Imperial hands, Caratulia and Thraxis fell to the traitors' onslaught. From these strongholds, and from the Maelstrom itself, Heretic Astartes' craft continued to attack Chogoris. Emboldened by the continued conflict, packs of mutants gather in the mountains, and insurrection is rife among the city's multitudes. Even demonic incursions are still commonplace, so thin has the veil around Chogoris become. From his fastness in Hanzhou, Chapter Master Jubal Khan sees some fiendish intelligence at work in the pattern of the ongoing attacks. He is determined to stamp it out and reclaim the subsector in the Kagan's name. But even with a full chapter at his disposal, his task is monumental. Speaking of the Great Khan, he is not doing too well. During the siege, he was captured by Luftiron and tortured. His body was left completely and utterly broken. So much so that he had to be interred in a life support casket, something kind of like a dreadnought sarcophagus. But whereas his body is broken, his mind remains true and steadfast. He continues to lead the chapter, giving orders to his subordinates and having them enact his will, for his spirit still remains strong. As to why he hasn't been interred in a dreadnought, White Scar's not really the biggest fan of the dreadnoughts, and he probably just doesn't want to be in one, so this is the next best thing, I guess. But to sum up the war for Chogoris, the White Scars were terribly and utterly mauled. Again, we don't know how many of them died, but it's estimated that well over half the chapter were destroyed, with many of their gene-sealing weapons and relics being lost to demonic taint. Again, don't really know the exact numbers, but it was pretty bad. Many of their captains were lost as well, with the chapter master being severely wounded. But absolutely worst of all to the Sons of the Khan, their primary and only recruiting ground of Chogoris was scoured from life. It's estimated that most of the population were destroyed, somewhere in the realm of 90%, and the few that are left may very well be chaos tainted. For truly, Chogoris still bears the taint of chaos, in at least one fashion or the other. Combine that with the rest of their home sector being under chaos assault, and some worlds being actively occupied by chaotic Astartes, this truly was the worst defeat the Sons of Jagatai had suffered. But like the great Warhawk himself, they will rise to the task again, for Chogoris and the entire Yasan sector shall be free, one way or another. But from the Hawks of Jagatai, we then move over to the Wolves of Russ, with the invasion of Magnus the Red and the siege of the Fenris system. Alright, so there's a lot to cover in here because they did a whole book series on this son of a bitch, if you can believe it. But all of this stems from the Wolfen. You see, there was a demonic incursion on a planet called Neurades. The Space Wolves, underneath Harald Deathwolf, were there. Lo and behold, they got ambushed by demons, but they were saved by none other than the 13th Great Company, known as the Wolfen. Tildia. In the aftermath of the splitting up, Fenris was like, yeah, we don't do that Code of Astartes bullshit, so they kept their great companies. What were left? One of them was the 13th, the final great company, happened to get lost in the warp and thus transformed into Wolfen, aka Space Wolves, wolves, werewolves, type shit. Their appearance, not only did it save the wolves, was a big thing, because this marked the first time they had ever appeared in roughly about 1,000 odd years, maybe 2. After seeing this and realizing that the Wolfen were back, the Space Wolves decided we need to get all our brothers together and rally them. But it wasn't just to get all the puppies back together in one band, it was believed by many that if they were fighting the Wolfen, they could locate Leman Russ. because the Wolfen haven't been lost in the warp, leaving Russ being in the warp, A plus B equals C. But notice how the Wolfen were technically warp mutated, kinda not really. The Space Wolves didn't want the Inquisition finding out, because surprise surprise, the Inquisition and the Space Wolves fucking hate each other. Lamau, I know. So all of this was done in a secret. But then lo and behold, Dark Angels Sue then arrive. But this was after the Space Wolves had left. Lo and behold, they found a scout. The Dark Angels, being the Dark Angels, then have the chapter's librarians interrogate him. Because fuck you, I guess. After being mind melded, lo and behold, it turns out that the scout's vision were a bunch of his fellows being slaughtered by mutated Space Wolves, aka Wolfen. Azrael, showing why he's in fact the best Dark Angel, was like, hey, I'm not gonna act without proof, I need more proof, let's go and talk to them. And good on him, because it turns out this scout was actually a changeling. Yes, that changeling. The changeling wasn't done though, as he continued to talk bullshit and make more lies, and we'll get back to him in a second. At the same time, the Grey Knights were busy purging many worlds that were now being consumed by demons. During this time, they would discover the corpse of a Wolfen warrior. Thus, the Grey Knights realized what happened with the Wolfen. Again, surprising pretty much everyone, the Grey Knights and Space Wolves met and they had a conversation, like actual grown-ups. And thus they managed to come to an understanding between the two. It was also at this time that the Grey Knights realized that, hey, Magnus may be coming for a bit of revenge. Watch out for that. Soon after this though, lo and behold, Chaos arrived in the form of the Black Legion. And pretty much everybody else. Chaos Space Marines, demons and cultists and every goddamn thing in between. Led by an Alpha Legion Lord himself. And everything started going to hell in a handbasket. Fenris was being absolutely swarmed by chaos entities, both demonic and mortal. Yet the Sons of Rust, tenacious to their damn nature, were able to hold off for a time. And lo and behold, just as the stalemate was reached, and as the Fenris system burned, who else but the Dark Angels would arrive? But it wasn't just them. Turns out, the Sons of the Lion had brought a grand total of elements from 14 other chapters, including the Ultramarines, Howling Griffins, Red Consuls, Marines Malevolent, Shadow Hunters, Guardians of the Covenant, Doom Griffins, and the Iron Hands. There were also Knights as well as Titans, including some Imperial Navy as well as Astra Militarum involved. And they were here to cleanse the Fenris system, because the Changeling, remember him, was still up and about. And through bullshit, visions, and demonic nonsense, he was able to show Azrael everything he needed to see, and got proof entirety that lo and behold, the Space Wolves had been corrupted by chaos. Seeing all this going on now, and a whole horde of demons in the mix, well, Tzeentch is good at scheming and lying. Thus, the Imperial fleet began to bombard Fenris. Seeing this, Ragnar Blackmane, accompanied by Knight Captain Stern of the Grey Knights, would reach the Gloriana-class battleship the Invincible Reason, the flagship of the Dark Angels, and they would go to be like, yo, what the fuck? It was then that Knight Captain Stern would be like, yo, that guy over there is in fact a Tzeentchian demon. The Changeling then went Lamau and then just dipped. Cue a giant Looney Tunes race looking for this son of a bitch up and down in the bowels of the rock. A la Conrad in the Lion ship too, Electric Boogaloo. The Changeling, being Tzeentchian, decided to release more secrets, aka the fact that the Fallen are a thing, by releasing said Fallen and having them cause all types of nonsense. In the end, old Tzeentchi boy got his dick smacked in, and he would be banished. Thus, the Space Wolves and Dark Angels and all the Imperials were now on the same page, which was very good. But then everything went to shit. Because just as the Imperial forces were getting stuck in, Magnus appeared. And lo and behold, Magnus and his 1,000 sons would cause such utter terrible destruction that it would be felt even till this very day. The wrath of Magnus was something terrible. For even the combined might of the Grey Knights, Space Wolves, Dark Angels, and a whole host of other vital chapters nearly wasn't enough to banish the great demon. Only by the combined might of all of them, the sacrifice of many important people, and the death of countless Imperial lives, was the Axe of Morkai, a coordinate battle axe mind you, which Logan Grimnar had claimed, was able to finally drive its way into the heart of Magnus, in combination with the final blow from the Spear of Rust itself. The Great Chosen of Tzeentch was finally banished back to the realm in which he came from, and soon all of his evil spawn as well. But whereas Magnus had been banished, the Space Wolves had suffered greatly, and lost so very much. Taken from Codex Space Wolves, 8th edition. Logan Grimnar knew well what was to come in the aftermath of the Primarch's banishment. He had fought alongside the Grey Knights before, notably during the First War for Armageddon and the last days of Sanctus Reach, and knew their methods were as thorough as they were uncompromising. All those mortals that had witnessed the taint of the demon firsthand were to be processed and destroyed without mercy, or left alone the seed of that knowledge could eventually bear terrible fruit. In the War for Fenris, countless thousands of native tribesmen had not only set eyes upon demon hosts, but in some cases, directly fought them. The Grey Knights had already begun their dark work, their agents gathering those tribes afflicted by the truth into the bowels of vast bulk lifters. Grimnar's Wolf Lords protested, and even came to blows, but this time there was nothing the Great Wolf could do to intervene. To resist the edicts of the Ordo Malleus, whilst the eyes of the High Lords were upon them, were to risk bringing the entire chapter under censure, and perhaps trigger another civil war, just when the hour was darkest, perhaps even damning Fenris to exterminatus, alongside its departed brother Midgarda. With a heavy heart, Logan Grimnar gave his seal of approval to the tribesmen's abduction. They were never seen again. The worlds of the Fenris system were plagued by disasters as the aftermath of the Tzeentchian invasion rolled on. Midgardia's demise had shaken every planet and moon in that system, taking a gradual but profound effect upon every neighboring world. Frostheim had been reduced to a wasteland of bone. Its icy mantle melted away to reveal a thick stratum of fossils. There were those who said that under a new moon, some of the skeletons came alive, hunting for the blood of those mortals still eking their lives from the osseous wastes. Svelgard, the ocean moon, was exhausted over the course of a long and difficult month. As it passed close to the Wolf's Eye, it was subject to a barrage from solar storms, induced by Midgardia's demise. Solar flare lashed its surface, turning the once tainted seas to a stream. Though barren, it was subsequently resettled, its sandy islands turned into mountains of glass amidst the hard-baked crust of the seabed. Aldmrani, the Wolf Moon, remained a hellish wasteland. It had been the site of a demon ritual of surpassing size, and though it has since been reconsecrated, there were sightings of wolf-geists for weeks. The moon was racked by electrical storms and hurricanes of flesh-stripping intensity, but it rode out the catastrophe, rebuilt by the adepts of the Imperium into an astropathic relay station linked to the choristems of Terra's warden districts. Though it too was assailed by natural disasters beyond sane measure, Fenris itself remained whole. The infection beneath its crust eventually burned away. The planet, vast and indomitable, had orbited the Wolf's Eye for geological eras uncounted. It would endure, as it always had. For a time, the spawn of chaos frothed and crawled from fissures and seas, expelled from the natural order as a healthy body expels a splinter. The rune priests, communicating with the spirit of the world wolf, were quick to proclaim it whole. Yet from that day on, the relationship with the Dark Angels was more strained than ever before, and the agents of the Ordo Hereticus were frequent guests in the Fang's halls. Some said the monsters that haunted the Ferenzian wilderness had lately been more terrifying than any could recall, and that the dark gods had cast a pall across the death world. But the people of Fenris were warriors born, not given to despair. Over time, the nightmares of the false Famenheit faded away. By that time, Logan Grimnar and his most trusted warriors were long gone, having received a distress hymnal of paramount urgency from the fortress world of Cadia, one that hinted at the presence of multiple demon Primocs, including Magnus. The Wolf Lords had mustered once more around the Grand Ulmus. Logan Grimnar had changed since the death of Eagle Ironwolf and his duel with the Crimson King. Now the same light glinted in his eyes as in that of his mentor, Urlik the Slayer. He had seen rust despite what whispers said. He was certain of it. The immediate danger was past. Their vendetta with Magnus and his 1,000 sons resolved for the time being at least. The wolf time was upon them, and they must rise to the challenge. So to sum up the little escapade of Magnus the Red to the Puppy Planet, the entire Fenris system was absolutely wrecked. Most of its tribal inhabitants were slaughtered, and those that remained were probably chaos tainted. Maybe. Again, Fenris being the prime, if not only recruiting ground for the Space Wolves. A whole planet, brother to Fenris, Midgardia, was outright exterminatus. Countless worlds were ruined, and Fenris itself was said to bear the scars of taint. Not to mention, a significant amount of wolves were slaughtered, including many of their great wolves. All in all, pretty rough to call it a victory, but it was the victory they survived, though the amount that was lost compared to what was saved. Is it worthy to call it anything but a defeat? Well, that's for time to tell. From the Volca Fenrica to the Wall of Terror, let's take a look at the Imperial Fists. And for the fists, we have none other than the War of the Beast. I'm not going to be covering the War of the Beast because it makes my head pain. Plenty other videos on it, go check them out. But what we are going to be taking a look is the disaster of Armandatia. Armandatia was a dark volcanic world, and lo and behold, in mid-M32 it would be invaded by a rare Xenos race, known as the Chromes. Most of the Imperial Fists, as well as a good chunk of the Imperial Guard, responded to the threat. But it soon became apparent that these aliens were not assaulting, they were fleeing. Fleeing from something very dangerous, a new Orc warboss, known simply as the Beast. And he was a mighty and terrible foe, and in the first spillings of blood of this cataclysmic war, the Orc attack moon would annihilate Imperial forces and recharge itself by consuming Armandutia with tractor beams. Even as Orcs and Imperial fists still battered on the planet, it would be consumed and destroyed. Most of the Imperial fists would be lost, with only one, known as Corland, being recovered from the remains, taken from I Am Slaughter. There would be no glory. Daylight knew that now. He had been foolish to expect it, and wrong to crave it. A warrior of the Adeptus Astartes did not go to war for glory. War is duty. Only duty. He had longed for reinstatement for such a long time, like all the Wall Brethren, passing their silent and lonely years of vigil on the palace walls, embodying the notion of Imperial Fist resilience. He had secretly and bitterly mourned the deprivation. He had yearned for so long, even to the point on some dark days, when he had almost wished for a threat to come to Terra, or another civil strife to ignite, just so he could defend his wall and test his mettle again. When the call had finally and unbelievably come, he had armored himself without hesitation and left his station on Daylight Wall to go to the side of his chapter. Making that journey, he hadn't been able to help himself. He hadn't thought of duty, he had thought of glory. Instead, he had found this, a slaughter, a final miserable slaughter. In the twilight of a nightmare moon that should not be, in the freezing pitiless rain, on the blood-soaked soil of a broken, unimportant backwater world, his ancient chapter was being cut down to the very last man. The venerable order, the illustrious heritage, the bloodline of the Primarch progenitor. It was all about to be lost forever. It could never be brought back. Terra's greatest champions were about to be rendered extinct, and the gates and walls of eternal Terra were to be left unguarded. The enemy was already inside, terrifyingly close to the core. Stupidity had led to this. Strategic carelessness, the vain ambitions of high lords, and the complacency of veteran warriors who should have known better and had led to this. A calamity that had mistaken for a minor crisis. An ancient and so frequently dismissed enemy had been woefully underestimated. What's more, no one would learn from this dire mistake, because no one would live. Terra would burn. There would be no glory. The orcs were upon them, bestial roaring faces in the steaming rain. They swarmed across the lakeside in their thousands, raging and howling, blowing their dismissal war horns, slamming their weapons against their shields to beat out the final heartbeats of the last few human lives. Above, low, and impossible, the face on the clockwork moon howled threats at the world it was killing. Rainwater and blood steamed off the visor of Daylight's helm. He tightened his grip on his gladius. His ammo was spent, so he clamped his combat shield to his left forearm to meet the foe up close and force them to pay a bitter tithe for his lifeblood. The orcs rushed in, tusks bared, spit flying from their snarling lips. Daylight met them and drove sword blade through a head, severed a limb, gutted an armored torso. Algren was already gone, a butchered headless corpse on the black blood ground. The rain was a curtain, a veil of silver, like fine chainmail. Tranquility was at his left hand, Zathrasa at his right. Together they formed as much of a wall as they were able, stabbing and hacking, ripping green flesh and brute armor. Zathrasta's war spear punched through plate armor and leather, flesh, bone and blood. Broken mail rings and shreds of leather flew up in the rain from the blows of Tranquility's hammer. Blood squirted, jetted. Daylight put the edge of his gladius through a jaw and tusk. He back-swung to open a throat, blocked an axe with his shield, and stepped in to kill the owner. Too many now. Too many. Too many to strike at. Too many to fend off. Relentless. Unending. Like the noise bursts, the gut-shaking roars. Daylight felt the first of the wounds, blades reaching underneath his defenses, around his shield, from behind, waistline, hip, lower back, nape of the neck, upper arm, thigh, armor splitting, warning alarms in his helm, pain in his limbs, blood in his mouth, red lights on his visor display. Teeth clenched. He turned in time to see Tranquility fall, head all but severed by a jagged cleaver, the greenskin whooping in triumph, drenched in Space Marine blood. He heard Zarathrasa roar in rage and pain. Daylight staggered. He fought. He swung his sword even though it was broken. He said, "Daylight Wall stands forever. Daylight Wall stands forever. No wall stands against it. Bring them down." He said it as though it still meant something. He said it as though there were anyone other than the orcs left alive to hear it. He kept on saying it until the packs of beasts tore him apart. By the end of the War of the Beast, the entire of the Imperial First Chapter was extinct. So much so that they had to be rebuilt from their successors. Again, whilst it was a victory, it came at a cost. For the original Imperial Fists, those left by Dorn himself, were now truly dead. And what was lost was great. Countless worlds of the Imperium sundered, untold numbers of lives, an entire chapter of the first founding, sundered to a man. Not to mention, Terra itself had been held at gunpoint. The Fists did their duty, but in the end, not even they expected to pay such a terrible price. But from the bastions of the 8th Legion to the angels of the 9th, let's talk about the Sons of Sanguinius and the devastation of Baal. The devastation of Baal was the assault of the Blood Angels' homeworld by High Fleet Leviathan. It was a brutal and devastating fight. Again, it has its own book series as well as countless stories, tie-in campaigns and all that, so I won't be going over everything here now, but the super short TLDR is this. Dante, Big Lord Commander himself, would summon the Brothers of the Blood, every single successor chapter that bore the gene seed of Sanguinius, to come and defend the home world of their sire. And every single chapter would answer, except for the Lamenters, who were kind of in a shitty spot at the moment, which is understandable. They're kind of basically dead or not dead, but the law's a little iffy, but they had an excuse, and a good one at that. But everyone would show up. Even those chapters that weren't on good terms with the Blood Angels, such as the Angels Vermilion, everyone sent either their full chapter, or most of them. Altogether, 30 different chapters were gathered, and Dante had at his command well over 30,000 Space Marines to defend against High Fleet Leviathan. It would not be enough. The entire might of High Fleet Leviathan would descend upon Baal, its entire system, and the Sons of Sanguinius, and the war that ensued would be something of darkest nightmare and most evil of night. The Blood Angels fought with valor and determination, and when that failed, they fought with blood-black rage and vengeful, raving thirst. But even then, this was not enough. The Tyranids consumed planet after planet, and eventually Baal Prime itself the homeworld of the angel, was seemingly said to be destroyed, devoured. Even as Dante dueled with the Swarm Lord himself and struck the beast low, it seemed like it was all for naught. It was at this pivotal moment that the Indomitus Crusade arrived, led by Rabute Guilliman himself, and lo, the avenging sun made good his name, and in wrath incarnate, he descended upon the foes of the Imperium to avenge his nephews. In the midst of the madness, Kabanda, Demon Prince of Khorne, would arrive, declaring war on the Tyranids, for the Blood Angels were his blood prize, and no others. At the end of it all, Rabute Guilliman would declare Dante the Lord Commander of the Imperial Nihilus, and he would lead his brothers of the blood, what remained, that is, to free the rest of the Imperium from the grasp of any foe, be they Xenos, demon, or mutant. But most people don't really understand how bad this battle was. The sons of Sanguinius, all of them, were pushed to their very limit, so much so that even things once thought impossible were treated like ordinary day. Taken from the devastation of Baal. The Tower of Amero had withstood the invasion, with its windowless walls intact, even while the aliens battered at its walls. The battle servitors, dreadnoughts, Space Marines and bloodthirsts of the Amaran Guard had not once left their posts, keeping watch on the raging creatures within. The gates of Red Iron rarely opened, and never to let anything out. They shuddered. The Amaran Guard's 50-strong cohort withdrew from the gatehouse to the covered battlements overlooking the way to the tower. With a booming creak, the gates opened wide. As they did, so the bell at the pinnacle of the tower was unswaddled. Red and black silk was cast from the shutters that had never been opened before, and fell spiraling to the ground. The bell began to toll. The custodian of the damned emerged first, a Space Marine champion, oath-bound to remain within the tower until the end of days. Now those times had come, and he marched out with his sword flaring with energy, black armor glinting like oil. From behind him came the rattling of chains and the grinding of rusted doors forced wide by laboring machines, and howling and screaming of inhuman nature. All the words the thick animal voices uttered were broken beyond comprehension, save one. Blood! 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 The damned occupants of the Tower of Amaro burst forth from the darkness. They were abominations, twisted far from their human origins by rampantly malfunctioning gene seed. They were twice the size of mortal men, bulging with muscles. Yellow fangs took the place of human teeth. Their skin was blood red and waxy, their eyes amber. They bounded along knuckled fists like apes, screaming at the sky. 5 dozen immortal monsters whose suffering hung over the chapter like a poison, free at last to kill. They would take no direction. The custodian of the dam stood aside and went within an almond cylinder to let them pass. They sped by, raging, beating at their flesh, long black nails ripping at their own skin. A way had been cleared from the tower's gate on the Arx Murus down to the bottom of the redoubt into the Well of Angels. Directed by barred doors and hide barricades, the damned hurtled onward. Their roars filled the corridors of the keep until they came to the Grand Inner Ward, an internal killing field behind the Blood Gate. As the damned approach, portcullis, gates, and energy fields were all opened. Dead Tyranids tumbled down from corpse piles mounted against the gates to join the strata of stinking alien flesh filling the Well of Angels. The damned scrabbled out and over their bodies, scenting things to kill. Once they were gone, inner gates of the back ward opened, and the Space Marines ran out. By the time they were assembled and ready for the final sally a few minutes later, the screeches of embattled Tyranids were already echoing in the hall. At the end of the devastation of Baal, the butcher's bill was terribly steep. Of the 30-odd chapters, 8 were outright completely destroyed. 6 more were further reduced to basically destroyed. Every single other chapter was reduced to well below half strength. It is estimated that of the 30,000 Space Marines, barely 6,000 survived. Countless relics, chapter masters, great warriors, captains, champions, banners, honors, badges, everything was lost to the Tyranids. The sons of Sanguinius, led by Dante himself, had taken to the field of battle, and they came back with basically nothing. For whilst the Tyranids had been driven from the field, they had taken a great deal with them. But from the blood of the angels to the iron of the Gorgon, let's take a look at the Morai Schism of the Iron Hands. Now this one here is interesting, as this is the most important loss that they suffered, not because of how many men they lost, even though technically they lost a third of their chapter, but they didn't actually die. But before I explain it in super detail, let us rely on traditional wisdom, shall we? Taken from Codex Iron Hands 6th edition. The Morai Schism began simply enough, as a flicker of unexplained fluctuations in a ForgeWorld's data looms, a picosecond more or less, as it would have escaped notice entirely, amounting to nothing more than the beat of a Sommothos' tiny wings. But these fluctuations were observed by a triad of tech mystics, who divined the word of the Omnissiah within its geometric patterns. From that brief flaring, they extrapolated predictions of an apocalyptic import. The fate of mankind writ large in a flicker of a light. By the time their heresy had come to the attention of the Inquisition, their findings had spread through the Morai's encrypted archives like a machine plague, exhorting the scattered brethren of the Adeptus Mechanicus to overthrow the yoke of Mars in favor of a new and glorious imperial cult, founded through fusion with the ecclesiarchy. By the time the Martian fleet had blasted Morai from history, it was already too late. The heretical word had spread throughout not only the Adeptus Mechanicus, but also those organs of the Imperium most closely associated with them, Titan Legions, Night Houses, and the Iron Hands. The Morai doctrines were soon embraced by a significant portion of not only the Iron Hands, but many of their successor chapters. Conditioned to embrace the perfection of logic and preeminence of the machine, they were easy prey for the Morai Creed. While Clan Company Rukon projected these siren promises to the last battle brother, such fortitude was not witnessed across the chapter. The Burgos saw the total conversion to the Morai Creed, a fact surely not unconnected to the high level of augmentational implant practiced by that clan company. The remaining companies, notably Avernii, Harmach, and Vorgon, experienced the subversion of anything from a handful of battle brothers to almost half their fighting strength. Before long, Medusa was hurtling towards civil war. The reason why I chose the Morai Schism is because how it impacted the chapter. The Morai Schism changed the Iron Hands forever. The Iron Hands nowadays are known as dicks. Whether or not you chalk this up to GW just not liking them, the fact of the matter is they are not nice folks. And everyone in the Imperium does not care for them. But many people have wondered why. Why is this the case? Why is this the means? And all of it can be traced back to the Morai Schism during the Nova Terram Interregnum in M35, which was basically a giant conclave fuck-up of a civil war. On the ForgeWorld of Morai, a creed was created, and this creed was said to be heretical by the ancient Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Iron Hands, being very close to the Mechanicus and believing in many of their teachings, were also involved. And what would happen would be the greatest civil war the chapter had ever seen, as well as the Mechanicus had ever seen, since the days of the Horus Heresy. But what exactly was the Morai Creed? Well, the Morai Creed comes from the ForgeWorld of Morai. The creed maintained that the Astronomicon contained hidden messages. These messages were from the Omnissiah and prophetic in nature. The Morai tech priests compiled all these messages in their archives, and many of these had apocalyptic meanings, such as the future overthrow of Mars and the fusion of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Ecclesiarchy. As you can imagine, the Admech did not care for this, and thus Mars treated this as a heresy, and lo and behold, civil war was quickly sparked between traditionalist and radical elements. This was not a short thing, as well over 2,000 years this conflict would reign. And it wasn't just the Admech. Countless Night Houses, Titan Legions, and Space Marine chapters that were allied or closely associated with the Mechanicus also fell into this, and none more so than the Iron Hands. All this would come ahead when those who believed in the Morai Creed would attempt to seize control of Clan Dorvek via its gene seed banks. Basically, they wanted to get the clan company on their side via force. After this and the intervention of Clan Rakan, everything was gone to hell in a handbasket to say certain. Thus, the chapter was on the edge of a full-blown civil war. Yet surprising for everyone, the Iron Hands expressed a bit of self-control. Thus they convened the Decree of Exertus, in which every single Morian followers from the Iron Hands and all their successors were expelled as exiles. The exiles accepted their fate, and so many of them and so well had they fought that by the end, 2,000 years later, they'd essentially formed their own chapter. Recognizing this, the High Lords of Terra took a weird thing and kind of recognized them officially as the Sons of Medusa chapter. Eventually, the Morai Schism would be stopped altogether, and that's how the Morai Schism would end. Now, some of you may be asking, hold up, Brad, wait a minute. Why is this their most devastating loss? Again, it's not because of the physical casualties, but rather, it's because of what it did to them. You see, in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Iron Hands would convene, and they would have a council discussing what exactly went wrong. How could their great father Ferrus Manus lose? How could he die? How could their legion be placed in such a position? And they came to one simple answer. Emotion. Emotion bad. Emotion dumb. Because Ferrus Manus had rushed in headlong into out of rage, he had let his emotions get the better of him, and thus it led to his death. So if the Iron Hands get rid of emotion, they will get rid of everything bad. Thus the Iron Hands began their process of being dicks. But this was cemented with the Morai Schism. Whilst the Morai Schism and the Morai ideology was about prophecy, it was also about change. Those who embraced the Morai Schism were those who believed in change. They believed in a different way of thinking from the original chapter, from the traditionalist faction. And what did the Iron Hands do? They gathered up all of them and basically put them on a ship and told them to fuck off. This meant that any and all Space Marines who had the potential to change the chapter, to redirect it on its route, was sent away. The only ones who were left in the chapter after this event were those hardline extremists who wanted nothing more than to simply follow the old ways. And those ways decreed that emotion was evil and that it needed to be purged. So in the end of it all, the Iron Hands lost anywhere from about a third to half of their chapter. Not dead, mind you, but they did kind of bugger off and start their own chapter, which, you know, is not really the same thing, but it's not good either. But the real loss came with the loss of understanding. With this, the mentality of the Iron Hands was truly cemented. The flesh was weak, pure, simple, and utterly. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Iron Hands are dicks. That and GW just seems to have a hate boner for them, but hell, both are probable. But from the Iron Tenth to the Sons of Ultramar, let's now take a look at the Ultramarines in the War for Macragge. Arguably the most famous out of all the lists here, this one easily earns the spot for the worst defeat of the Ultramarines. Again, I won't be covering this one super in depth because there's a whole series about it and you should read it. It's really good, old, solid, classic 40k lore. But the TLDR version. An unknown Xenos shows up on the world of Tyran 4. It destroys all of it, everything. Inquisitor Krypton finds it and names them the Tyranids, and lo and behold, they are coming to munch on shit. After burning a couple worlds, he realizes that they have to stop at Ultramar, and these are some hungry boys. So if they don't get anything at Ultramar, they'll be turned back. But if they do get Ultramar, the Imperium is in for a bad time. So Mr. Manius motherfucking Calgar, big double-fisted man himself, gathers the entirety of the Ultramarines chapter, the entirety of the Ultramar Auxilia, a whole Titan Legion and some knights as well, and prepares to defend the world. And the battle is going pretty well, with the Ultramarine defenses being divided into three main armies, moving around and destroying enemy foes and positions before they can really sink their teeth in. Yet despite all of it, the Ultramarines were only matching what was being thrown at them. That was, however, until the deployment of the Swarm Lord. In a titanic duel with this monstrous creature after having been ambushed by so-called Tyranids feigning dead, Manius Calgar would lose 3 of his limbs and be left in critical support. And only by the sacrifice of his Victrix honor guard was he able to be evacuated into the space above Ultramar. The ground battle was going pretty bad, but believe it or not, the space battle was going even worse, as the Hive Fleet had swarmed and destroyed pretty much every ship as well as station that the Ultramarines had. This allowed them to directly deploy onto the planet proper, not just via the normal means, but to cover the entire surface of Macragge, including the vital pole of fortresses, with hordes of unending ravenous Xenos. But just as everything seemed to be damned, a reinforcement fleet from Terra itself would arrive with 200 Imperial ships, led by the Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra, had come to the aid of beleaguered Ultramar. But even then, this was not enough, for Tyranid numbers will always prove telling. So the flagship, Dominus Astra herself, valiantly charged into the heart of the Hive Fleet and detonated her warp drives, creating a vortex of death and destruction that eradicated the entire Tyranid fleet, leaving nothing. Yet although technically a victory, the aftermath would forever change the Ultramarines. Taken from Codex Ultramarines, 5th edition. Hours later, the main Tyranid fleet arrived at Macragge. With no sign of reinforcements, Calgar led his fleet in a series of daring attacks, striking at isolated vessels as they spread out to invade Macragge in force. Caught between the blistering firepower of Macragge's polar fortresses and the vengeful hammer blows of Calgar's fleet, Tyranid vessels were destroyed by the score, but many more yet remained. As battle raged, the Tyranids unleashed thousands of spores above the vital polar fortresses. If the fortresses were taken, Macragge's guns would be silenced, and the world left defenseless. So it was that the Tyranids landed even in greater numbers than before, and the fortresses too found themselves sorely beset. Their gruesome cargo delivered, the battered hive ships retreated to orbit. Trusting to his Ultramarines to keep the fortress secure, Calgar relentlessly pursued the Tyranid fleet, determined that it would not bring ruin to other worlds. Never before or since has the valor of the Ultramarines been tested as it was in the defense of the polar fortresses. The veteran Space Marines of the First Company led the lightly armed auxilia in a tenacious defense of the fortresses, holding every wall and trench until the last possible moment, before it was overrun by the Tyranid swarm. Slowly the troops withdrew ever deeper into the fortress, while making the Tyranids pay for every single yard of ground they advanced. The Titans of Legio Praetor stalked to the ice fields, and drove smoking furrows through the onrushing Tyranid hordes with shells and plasma. The ferocity of the swarms was unbelievable. At the northern fortresses they overran the walls by using steaming piles of their own dead for cover. Titans were dragged down and ripped apart by sheer weight of numbers. The defenders' gun barrels glowed red hot and jammed in spite of the Arctic cold. Ammunition began to run low, though the fortress contained stockpiles for months of siege. Yet still the defenders fought on. Lumbering side-arm carnifexes tore into the defenders' bastions like living battering rams, smashing their way through metal and rockcrete walls with equal fury. The Ultramarines had to rely on heavy short-range firepower to bring down the foe, but for each Tyranid that fell, another 3 sprang forward to continue their fight. Lesser men were paralyzed with terror as the Tyranids broke through the perimeter again and again. But the Ultramarines never despaired and never gave thought to defeat. The dark, dank corridors beneath the northern fortresses were already altered by the alien presence. Mucus dripping from their walls and ceilings, and a pervasive musky stench filled the air. Alien screams and roars echoed and reverberated along the tunnels. The Space Marines pushed onward into corridors littered with Tyranid and Ultramarines dead, the darkness reluctantly receding before their suit lights. Camilloid lictors lay in ambush amongst the corpses, slashing into the advanced squads in an orgy of destruction. Eventually the forward squads used their flamers to burn their way along the passages and flush out their enemy. Even as fire consumed them, the creatures still leapt forward, with claws outstretched to rend and slay. In the aftermath of all this, the First Company would be dead to a man. The entirety of the Ultramarines chapter had suffered grievous losses. Again, it's unknown how much, but a couple hundred, perhaps even half the chapter, maybe even more, hell who knows. It's safe to say the Ultramarines had to rebuild. Some were told that it would change them. For the first time ever, they would deviate from the Codex Astartes, creating the Tyrannic War of Veterans. For the new First Company would be founded directly from all those who had survived the initial combat, and that's how the Ultramarines would become experts in fighting the Tyranids. But to recap, the First Tyrannic War, the Battle for Macragge, the Ultramarines had lost so much. Their world, the pride, the jewel of the Imperium, Ultramar and its system was ravaged. The worlds were literally eaten alive. The Ultramarines themselves had lost so many men, including their veteran First Company. A Titan Legion lay in ruin, countless Knight houses had been sundered, and the Ultramar Auxilia and the people of the realm were but a shadow of their former selves. Yet the Imperium still lived. Despite everything, Ultramar endured, but at what cost? Was the price too high? None can say. The only thing that one can be certain of is that that was just the first of many wars that would occur with the Tyranids. But from the Rome-loving boys of Ultramar to my beloved boys of the Salamanders, with the defense of Nocturne. For the Salamanders, we have the Dragon Strife. For those of you who don't know, when Gilliman presented his Code Societies, there were those who agreed with it and those who disagreed with it. One of the many who did was Vulcan. Vulcan's boys had been fucked up pretty bad throughout the entirety of the heresy, thus he didn't want them being divided into different chapters. So, Gilliman made a deal with him. His boys could stay in one chapter, but they had to follow everything else. And they were right with that. Now some of you may be thinking this is a big compromise, but not really when you consider that there were barely less than 1,000 Salamanders left after the heresy. Yeah, it was fucking bad, not gonna lie. Because of this, the Salamanders didn't sire any successors, or official successors mind you. One byproduct of this meant that there weren't really chaotic Salamanders up and about, as the only Salamanders there were from Nocturne. Whilst you may have the odd one here and there throughout the century, usually they were put down immediately and there was no roving chaotic bands of Salamanders, because there was only the Salamanders themselves. But we do have one instance of a Salamander coming home and it not being a good time, that being the warlord known as Neelan. For he would lead a warband of Chaos Space Marines known as the Dragon Warriors, in conjunction with the Iron Warriors demon host known as Elgin Sak, in an attempt to assault Nocturne to steal the ancient Tome of Fire, in which they hope to resurrect the former's master, known as Vaitan Urshak, Neelan being a former member of the Salamander's Third Company. Neelan would use a seismic cannon on his flagship, known as the Hellstalker, to create an entrance deep underneath Mount Deathfire, to gain access into the vaults of Vulcan that were rumored to hold the Tome of Fire. The assault of the Chaos Warband was brutal and quick, being able to sweep aside many of the defenses there. But the Salamanders, true to their nature, were able to hold on long enough for Chief Librarian Valkona to arrive. In a brief battle of warp powers, Valkova was able to overcome Neelan, but Neelan was able to escape thanks to the sacrifice of his bodyguards, known as Ramlik. After killing Ramlik by literally breaking him upon an anvil, fucking sick shit, I love Salamanders, bro. Valkona and the Salamanders would be after Neelan, but he would be able to escape, vowing vengeance on his former brothers. Again, this is the worst defeat that the Salamanders had suffered, not really in terms of numerical losses, but more so what it represented. For the first time ever, a Chaos Salamander from their own company had made their homeworld bleed, had killed men and women of Nocturne, had killed his fellow battle brothers. As someone from the Salamanders all about love, family, loyalty, and honor, this shit fucking hurted, son. This was worse than any defeat the Salamanders could ever inflict, because the Salamanders, unlike other chapters, are used to taking grievous losses. They're used to being hurt physically. But if you really want to hurt a Salamander, you gotta hurt him where his heart is, just like Vulcan way back when. He could not be broken through physical pain, but rather through pain by the heart. That is what the Salamanders are, and that is what the Dragon Strife was. It was the closest thing the Salamanders ever got to a goddamn civil war, one of their own, drawing blades with them, and spilling their own blood. It was something that hurt, and something that would leave a mark on the Salamanders. Or, it was supposed to leave a mark, that is. Yeah, Nickheim series kinda got, cancelled? I don't know if it got cancelled, but they didn't make any more books and that whole plotline kind of just fell out of thin air, so unfortunate, but yeah, they weren't super good, but I mean, I kind of like them. But from the Dragons of the 18th, let us finish off now with the Ravens of the 19th and the Sons of Korax, with the Baran War. In the year M41-204, the Raven Guard would begin a campaign in the Baram system. This was a system that had been under occupation by an Orc warlord, known as Warlord Snagger. The Imperium, not liking this, decided that they would reconquer the entire system, dismantling the Orc Empire and completely putting it to flight. The Raven Guard were at the head of the coalition of Space Marines and joined with the Astromaritarum and Imperial Navy to get rid of this, and they did their work well. But the Orcs, being a tenacious bunch, still existed. Even after 20 years of hard-fought campaigning, there were still some feral Orcs left, but the Imperium would declare victory. Whilst many Space Marines would depart, the remainder of the Raven Guard force that had deployed there stayed to continue eradicating the Orcs, in addition with the Baran Guard, now known as the Baran Siege Masters, just recently raised. The Orcs would continue to be put down for some time, and it would seem that the Baran system would slowly be incorporated into Imperial hands. But fate is fickle, and lo and behold, it turns out that these worlds didn't belong to the Imperium before, for someone even older had claim to them, and that was none other than the craft world of Biel-Tan. For many Wraithborn warp gates were found on planets throughout the system, and Biel-Tan came to claim, what was once its own. For those who don't know, Bialtans are the murder elves. They fucking hate everyone and everything that isn't an elf, a la humans and orcs. So murder is definitely on their mind, and there was a lot of it. At first, the Raven Guard didn't really know exactly what was going on, only that orcs were slowly disappearing, but like permanently disappearing. Eventually they would look into it, and they would find that the Eldar had been the ones doing the killing. The Raven Guard had to respond, and they would do so, but no one could expect the outcome. Taken from Epic 40,000, Swordwind. Arriving on Baron, the Raven Guard chose to make only cursory contact with the men of Baron and their commander Asabara, choosing instead to move virtually unknown amongst the deepest and wildest reaches of Baron, reaching out the orcs in their own layers, searching for the source of their sudden ferocity. They would not wait long to find it. At a dozen sites across Baron, the Raven Guard found the remains of orc camps, littered with the burned out huts and dozens of orc carcasses. Indeed, Morideus could find no orc settlement standing at all. Something, it would seem, had driven every wretched greenskin from their lair and sent them hurtling against the fortress cities of Baron. It was quite possible that the orcs themselves had wrought such destruction, but to have done so spontaneously across the entire planet seemed too organized for them. Morideus feared that something more deadly lay at its root. Reconvening the scattered scouting parties, Morideus led his 100 or so men across the Voltis plains, a great wind-beaten steppe where even the orcs did not settle, but instead prowled in a nomadic predatory packs atop boars, squigoths, and other fungal monstrosities. After a week's hard march, the Raven Guard at last encountered orcs. A curious kind of relief to Morideus. It would seem that the nomadic orcs had proven more elusive than their encamped counterparts. And so here had yet evaded attack. The orcs as ever proved themselves eager for a fight, and rushed forwards in great numbers as soon as they caught the scent of the Space Marines. Morideus, however, saw little benefit in sending in yet more orcs fleeing across Baron, and after a cursory skirmish withdrew his men, leaving the orcs to bludgeon their way across the plains, as they ever had. His scouts remained close, however, hoping that whatever fate had befallen the orc settlements would soon reveal itself in pursuit of these nomads. Some days later, Morideus was once more proved shrewd. His scouts returned to report the orcs under attack, and Morideus at once led his Raven Guard to their position. 6 Thunderhawk gunships skimmed rapidly over the plain, following the signals sent by the remaining scouts. Even though in the short time it took them to arrive, the orcs were overwhelmed and slain. Instead of orcs, as Morideus and his Raven Guard emerged from his gunships, they were confronted by the Swordwind of Bialtan. Recognizing the Eldar for the more elusive opponent they truly are, Captain Morideus ordered an immediate assault, lest the Eldar simply vanished before he returned. The Eldar perhaps had not intended to engage the Imperium so soon, let alone the Space Marines themselves, and the Raven Guard's first strikes took heavy tolls. Relying on their favored hit-and-run tactics, the Eldar rapidly fell back, not so swiftly, more importantly, that the Raven Guard would not be able to follow. A running battle raged for hours as the Raven Guard, now heavily outnumbering the Eldar, harried them from all sides. At last, the Eldar's numbers dwindled ever more. They fell back finally into the midst of a great ring of standing stones, ancient monuments left from a time when the planet had been under the Eldar's rule. Here the Raven Guard resolved to wipe out the Eldar army utterly, rushing against them with their full strength. As with so many things, it proved to be just as the Eldar had intended. Amidst the standing stones, wraith gates opened. Small gates by Eldar standards, but more than large enough for the aspect warriors of Bialtan to pass. Marian's armies, who had been marauding all across Baron, now reconvened amidst the standing stones. Marian himself had arrived to take command moments later. Where the Raven Guard had thought they might surround and annihilate the Eldar, they now found themselves surrounded by a foe many times their own number. Even for the steady resistance they could offer, the Raven Guard survived precious few hours in the midst of the Eldar's circle of stone. The Raven Guard were gone, though the men of Baron would know nothing of their passing, for their minds remained utterly occupied with the ever-growing hordes of orcs which huddled themselves at the Imperial colonies. Now exactly how many Raven Guard were there we don't really know. We can, however, make some guesses. We know that at the time, what remained of the Raven Guard were at least well over 100 Space Marines. We also know that they were assigned 6 Thunderhawk gunships, each Thunderhawk carrying 30 Marines, meaning that carries a grand total of 180 Marines. And we consider that they had been campaigning for 2 whole decades before this, I think it's safe to say that they had anywhere from 200 to 300 Marines. Initially, that is. And here's the thing, what makes this victory so damning is that the Eldar would soon defeat the Orcs, and that they would conquer the entirety of the Baron system from the Imperials, meaning that 20 years worth of work that the Imperium, the Raven Guard, and many other Space Marine chapters had fought, bled, and died for was all undone in a matter of days. The Eldar had reclaimed everything that was once theirs, and the Imperium had lost everything. The entirety of the Raven Guard force was destroyed. Again, anywhere from 200 to 300 Marines over the course of 20 years. All of their craft, all of their heavy armor, all of their relics, and most importantly, all of their gene seed was completely, totally, and utterly lost. The Raven Guard, renowned as warriors of stealth and subterfuge, were lured into a trap and slowly killed. This was a loss of not only numbers, but also manpower, material, and of course, honor. For it was not just the defeat that the Imperium suffered in the Meat Days, for this was not just a defeat of a battle, but this was the undoing of an entire campaign. So many were lost, so much time was lost, and the Raven Guard forever mark it as a black stain on their honors. So, ladies and gentlemen, that has been every single major defeat of each original founding chapter. Now, some of these aren't always the greatest numbers, some of them have a bit more spiritual meaning to them, some of them have a bit more personal meaning to them. But it'd be super easy for me just to find the highest death count and just make it that. But I wanted to pick something that really hurt the Legion. Something that made them change, something that made them question. You take a look at every single instance here, be it from Luther escaping from the Dark Angels, to the Ultramarines having to become non-Codex compliant, to the Salamanders having to fight a civil war, or the closest thing they ever got to. Each and every single one of these changed them on their own basis. This left not only a physical, but a spiritual mark on each one of these chapters. And ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, a spiritual wound is far, far, far worse than a physical one. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is why these were the worst defeats suffered at Space Marine hands. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you have your own suggestion for what should be the worst defeat they suffered? Love to hear your thoughts down below. But I would say a massive thank you to you guys for watching. Even a more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Shout out to my Officer Corps with my Captain tier member, Mr. Sergeant Cossack, 68W173D. Shout out to my awesome Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3, Miss Withdrawal of the Void, Mr. Curtis Studies, and Miss Tori. Shout out to my awesome Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Bowen, Mr. Sean IRL7, Mr. Matthew Merrill, and Mr. That Guy. Shout out to my Cripple tier members, Mr. Tremayo the Math Kitty, Lord Rosarius, Mr. Tech Priest Toaster, Mr. Bowen, Shauna Smithers, The Gentle Salamander, The Winter Warhammer, Major Doshanet, Mr. Edward King, and Mr. Overanalyze This. And finally, but certainly not least, shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortis Unum, Mr. CMD Nay, Mr. Eric Massaro, Mr. Dom Marek, Mr. Ken_Sakura333, Mr. Adrian Von Furen, Mr. Morally Bankrupt, and Mr. Matthew Peter. Thank you, I love you, I appreciate you, you guys are bloody amazing. Some day when memberships get a bunch of awesome benefits, behind the scenes stuff, early access videos, but remember, this will always be free, so whether you give your boy a dollar or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! Also, sorry for the lack of videos lately, it's December, it's Christmas, I got a lot of shit to do, I got a lot of work I gotta wrap up on. Videos will be a little intermittent this month, please forgive. I do appreciate you for still being here, I love you guys, but yeah, life is hard, I'm a one-man show, so yeah. I appreciate you guys also very much, and I love you so very much. You guys are amazing. And in case I don't see you guys before, Merry Bloody Christmas, Happy New Year, God bless, whatever the hell you celebrate, I hope it's bloody amazing, and I love you. Glory to 40k, glory to you guys, glory to every damn thing in between, and partridge in a pear tree. Does that make a lick of sense? Nope, but I'm happy when I say it, and I love y'all, and that should be enough. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all sure say hello there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss Rangers! Me waiting for someone to call all this bullshit, but yeah, happy Christmas, motherfuckers.